Yeah, I do. I think sometimes stereotypes can be harsh on music students because of what the level of expectations of those kids is many times as serious or more so than a student athlete or high-level academic students. So sometimes the stereotype is that music is just fun, or music isn't a lot of work, when in reality it's a lot of work, and those kids put in just as much time and effort.
Instruments, like a flute being an early instrument, guitar being an early instrument, drums being a boyish instrument, those kind of things. And it definitely exists within the realm.
I think there are stereotypes. I don't necessarily know it's from the actual musicians, but I will say society has put stereotypes on things. You know, people think flute and they think female, low brass they think male, percussion they think male, and I think that's just based on maybe how they grew up back, you know, when they were going to school. But if you actually look at symphony orchestras throughout the country and bands throughout the world, it's pretty even as far as who's playing what instruments. And even for me, while teaching, I found that the non-stereotypical people that society thinks about actually do much better on those instruments. And that might just be because there's also the pressure of, oh, I have to be good because I don't play these instruments. So that might have something to do with it too. But yeah, it's definitely out there, but I think it's more societal as opposed to in actual like music community as far as the players.
Yes, I think there's a variety of stereotypes that riddle the music community.
Yes, just as we were saying earlier, how, you know, some instruments are historically more male-oriented and some are more female-oriented, just, you know, as we had said, drummers, historically male, flute players, flautists, Miss Johnston, are, you know, more female, violinists, things along those lines. You know, so, and it's funny because also when you say that, when you get a band that is all female, they will specify it by saying an all-girl band, whereas they will never specify an all-male band is playing blah, blah, blah. But the fact that they're all female, they have to point that out. You know, so even that, to a certain extent, is stereotyping, you know, it just because you're specifying the fact that they're all female. You know, if it wouldn't, it would be no big deal. But so yes, I absolutely do think that there is, you know, some of that going on in music. How prevalent, I'm not 100% sure.
I think there are. I think a lot of times when you think of like a professional musician, you tend to think of a male musician as opposed to a female musician.
Yes, I feel that people generally associate some instruments with having more masculine quality and some instruments having more feminine quality. Do I believe that is the case? No. I don't think any specific instrument has a certain characteristic that makes it either masculine or feminine, but people do associate it with that feeling.
Probably, but I'm not really aware of it.
Do I think there are gender-related stereotypes in the music community is the question. My answer to that, if you look at the history of orchestral music, it's pretty safe to say that there are some gender-related issues along the lines of this topic. If you go on YouTube and look at the old Berlin recordings, just in general, the European orchestras from the 50s and 60s, you won't find a female in the orchestra. That's changed a lot, but there's still a decent amount kind of that's left over from that time period. I think that I can't speak too directly to what's going on in Europe. I think in the United States, it's much less, especially now. A lot of the auditions take place behind a curtain or a wall or whatever, and I think that it's something that I'm hoping that
you think flute, generally you think female players, you don't see many male flute players, and if you think trombone, for instance, you think male, just because that's kind of what's been driven into it.
Yes, I do feel like that there's stereotypes within the music community because everyone based off of like history and kind of like society, people have kind of like made their way into the community and kind of like separated it so that like certain instruments are feminine or masculine. So society has a big role within this, I think, because
I don't believe or perceive that there are, but I'm sure they could be out there. There's a large majority of the conductor field is male dominated, but some great women are doing some great work. Same in the field of composers too, where it seems to be a male dominated world, but there are a lot of strong and up and coming women in the field. But I don't think there's any bias. I think there's some inequality, because I think maybe some men don't take women instructors or teachers or composers as seriously. I think in the musician world, I think there's a lot more even ground, because women have certainly proven that they can just be as strong, if not stronger, than many males.
Oh, that one I haven't thought about actually, as far as composers. But again, if you look at the famous composers through the 20th century even, most of the ones that we play are male composers. And again, back then in the field, it was mainly men getting those jobs, being hired by, princes and courts to compose the music. And women, again, were not thought to be part of that profession. And I think, again, it's just them breaking through decades and decades of being told that's not something you're supposed to do. And, there are a lot of great women composers coming out now.
I think that's because that's the history of music, but I believe that there's more female conductors of currently.
Yes, and that's kind of because whole like in history with all like the rights and everything, and I think that the males, I guess, kind of have like, I guess you could say more of like an opportunity, kind of, than females, just kind of based off of history and how each person.
Again, that comes down to like societal norms. Being a conductor is a lot like other career paths, such as being a doctor, being a lawyer, where stereotypically, 40, 50 years ago, it was a male profession, quote unquote, by society. And I just think it's taken a while for women to break into that. It's kind of like the glass ceiling with a lot of things. They're having to break into the field, and they have to work harder to prove themselves, which I think is why there are less female conductors out there right now. But, they're getting more and more.
I mean, not today. Maybe back then. But I think in today, as far as the musician is concerned, I think the stereotype in terms of the musician, at least at the professional level, is somewhat gone. You see professional soloists of both genders of a lot of basically every instrument. I mean, the best flutist in the world right now is a guy, and he's in Berlin Philharmonic. The best pianist right now, in my opinion, is a woman. And the best, they're just all around the place now. It's not that uncommon. But as far as conductors in particular, that one is definitely more rare. The field is definitely dominated by men, and that really is because it's just been historically the tradition. Now, if you ask me if a male conductor looks at a female conductor, that's a different issue. I don't know, to be honest. I'm in an interesting situation because when I got my master's degree in conducting, I study with a woman, Dr. Mallory Thompson, and she's considered one of the best conductors in the country right now. But I'd be lying if I said like one of the reasons why I wanted to study with her was because she was a woman. Like if she's a woman and she got up to that kind of prestige while still having that kind of stereotype against her, she must be doing something right. And then when I met her, it's just, she was like Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada. She's just like cutthroat. She's like, she said she had to work, you know, twice as hard in order to get where she is. And I definitely believe that.
I don't really know. I don't know that much about the musical world, but I think it has to do with how people are perceived. I think a lot of times a man is seen more as a figure of authority as opposed to a woman, and it would probably be a woman who would have to work twice as hard to get to that position as opposed to a man. I'm not saying that a male conductor isn't talented, but I think there's that generally accepted understanding that, you know, this particular person, because he's a man, he commands respect, or he should be listened to. And I think sometimes when you look at a woman who commands authority, sometimes there are some negative perceptions that take place.
Because kind of like the pitch of the instruments kind of changes of the thought to society of like if it's feminine or masculine. For example, like the tuba, since it's like a lower pitched instrument, people tend to think that it's more masculine.
Really more prominent male conductors, because I can't think of a single really big name female conductor.
The other area that it hits in is in the conductor, where very few female conductors at this point. But that's also changing. I mean, there's Joanne Folletta in Buffalo. There's several out there, and it's starting to increase more and more. So I think it's on a path to getting better, but yes, I think there certainly has been some gender kind of bias.
Definitely. I mean, if you look at all the major orchestras, I think there's like one prominent female conductor actually in the world right now. I forgot her name. And there's not, but all of the rest are male. I think so. It's still a male-dominated industry of music. And you look at world orchestras, like they're mostly males, actually. And most concert masters that I've seen, I don't know, but it is male-dominated. It's definitely not equal. And I don't think that there's any reason for it. But if in a given audition the male is better, then obviously deserves a spot. For females better, she deserves a spot. But I think that, especially with composers, I mean, what big female composers? I mean, have you ever heard of any? No. Exactly. So like, it just doesn't exist. Really, it's just not. It's something. And like, especially back when like a lot of the pieces that we were playing were written. I mean, that's when there was a huge gender inequality, and the whole like women's rights wasn't even existing really. In the 1800s.
Yeah, I think there's more prominent male composers than female, because if you think classical era, romantic era, you don't really think of.
Well, I think it's very similar. Yeah, I mean, it's just yes. I think that's also changing. But if you name one female composer in the 1800s, can you do it? Besides the wife of a famous male composer, right? I mean, it's yeah, absolutely. Does that mean that all the females up until 1938 couldn't compose and all of a sudden it changed? Of course not. It's just, it was the way it was. But it's changing a lot. Gene Higdon now, I mean, there's female composers out there. Joan Tower at Bard College, I mean, there's many now, more and more. So it's really a rapid rate of change, but it's definitely left over. There's a lot of issues.